Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Frank Conkle, and I'm the executive editor at Nextgov. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Rethinking Government Networks, Mission Delivery in a Time of Uncertainty, underwritten by Verizon. As federal, state, and local agencies make strides to modernize IT infrastructures to better deliver services, many have begun rethinking their networks and managed or professional services, especially during the current time we're in. In today's program, we'll explore the relationship between these services and scalability, customer experience, incident response, and more. But before we get started with the program, I'd like to point out the Q&A tab on the right of your screen. That's how you'll be able to ask questions. We'll be fielding these throughout the program. As early as you get them in, I'll take them. And so be sure to submit those along the way, and I'll get to them when I can. This webcast is being recorded and will be available later for on-demand viewing. Now, let's begin our program. We've got a lineup of panelists this afternoon. Gary Hensley, the Chief Operating Officer in the Strategic Enterprise Technology Office of the State of Arizona. We have Lauren Nossenberger, Chief Transformation Officer at the Air Force. Michael Lehigh, Secretary of Information Technology for the State of Maryland. And Stephen Wallace, the Systems Innovation Scientist in the Emerging Technology Directorate within the Defense Information Systems Agency. Okay, so to begin our conversation, I'd like to get around the horn a little bit and give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll sort of dive in with what's been going on lately. Gary, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon, and a pleasure being here with everybody. I'm Gary Hensley, Chief Operating Officer for the State of Arizona Information Technology. My role and responsibility has quite a few different facets to it. I have data center infrastructure and operations, as well as cloud operations, the service management office, our statewide enterprise voice and network services, mainframe operations, and I also run the state 911 and FirstNet program office.
Sure. Lauren, let's go to you.
Sure. So Lauren Knausenberger, and I am the Chief Transformation Officer for the United States Air Force. And I know Frank wanted me to chat a little bit about what that means, because it is a very unique title in government. It is a title that you tend to find more at a consulting firm or with a private equity firm that's trying to turn around an organization. And much like in the private sector, the Department of Defense, we are trying to transform. It is a huge initiative across all of the services and the broader department that we know that we have to become the 21st century digital department that we know that we can achieve. And so I have the pleasure as the Chief Transformation Officer to focus on those hard-hitting, cross-cutting initiatives that we think can provide a lot of value across the entire organization. So some of the things that I've gone after, most recently launching Digital University, noticing that we needed an inherently new way to look at our talent management across the Air Force and to democratize access to digital learning for all of the topics that are most important to us. So things like AI, data science, software development, and also looking at user experience and design as a huge necessary skill set to push forward. Have done a lot on the cybersecurity accreditation reform side. So that was something that, first 90 days on the job, everyone said, there's so much pain here, please help. So definitely that was a big cross-cutting initiative. And of course, pushing the DevSecOps revolution across the Air Force. So lots of fun topics, lots of incredibly energetic people, but it's great to get to work across all of the different silos to drive change.
And undoubtedly one of the coolest titles in government. There's not a lot of you guys running around there. Michael, let's get your bio here.
Thanks, Frank. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Leahy, Secretary of Information Technology for the state of Maryland. And although that sounds like a wonderfully powerful title, Maryland is still primarily a federated state, and we are dragging people kicking and screaming into an enterprise as quickly as we can.
Well, we'll talk a lot about how you're dragging them. shortly. Thanks, Michael. Stephen, go ahead.
All right, thanks. So my name is Steve Wallace from the Defense Information Systems Agency. So my role in the Emerging Technology Directorate, and we're a directorate that was really stood up about a year and a half ago, maybe a little less than that. Our role is to look at the challenges from across the agency and then across the department as well, and then try to find and drive innovative or creative technologies in those spaces. So we've got a number of pilots and prototypes going on right now. They range for everywhere from in the cyber area, where we've got our browser isolation pilot that's about to go to production here within the next few weeks, to some interesting approaches to mobility and classified mobility, and some things there. So for those who don't know, because I think we've got a pretty broad audience here, DISA is really an IT provider for the entire department. So where Michael talked about Maryland being a very federated IT type of approach, the DoD is very much the same. Everyone, it is a very deeply federated IT infrastructure. There are some common underlying components. That's typically where DISA plays. But we work very closely with the different agencies and services within the department to deliver capabilities. So we get to see a pretty broad swath of things.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm glad that you highlighted what DISA does, because I think our audience is so broad across the country. But yeah, I always think of DISA, the IT arm for the Pentagon, and then pretty much everything that they do from a tech side, DISA has some involvement in. So thanks for that. All right, laying the groundwork for this conversation. It's not too complicated, the situation that we're in, right? We're in a truly global pandemic. It's impacting almost every person in the world in some capacity. It's also presented some of the most striking challenges in recent memory, and probably beyond, to government work, and the workforce itself. So I want to spend some time with a few questions, just sort of laying the groundwork for what normal operations used to look like, say, prior to March for each of you, and then comparing that to what you had to do in the immediate response, and then we'll get to sort of how this sets you up for, how this sets your enterprises up for the future. But I want to start, I think, let's start with Gary and Michael here on the state side, and just talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted your mission, what your mission looked like before and sort of during this pandemic. And Gary, let's start with you.
Yeah, Frank. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic hitting, we have roughly 40,000 state employees, various services. Everything that was running normalized, we averaged on our call center environments approximately 400,000 calls a week, spread across many different agencies that are on a shared platform. The second week of the pandemic, which was the second week in March, it went from 400,000 a week and 0.2 million in a matter of 2 weeks. We're averaging still about 1.5 million inbound calls from constituents and citizens from the state seeking the services that are offered, whether it is health services and the COVID testing and testing stations, unemployment insurance, and the unemployment insurance side got hit probably the hardest. On the first week of March, the total call volume coming in processes about 50 calls per second maximum. We were peaking well over 100 calls per second, and it nearly crippled us. For me, it was like the IT version of a tsunami. We weren't prepared for it. I don't think anybody was prepared for it. We had to do some quick thinking. We worked well through the night because the call center environment was being crippled with the call volume coming in. So we worked with the service provider, worked through the night. We stood up a cloud solution to be able to filter calls coming in, and doing more on the front end of giving the callers options, trying to encourage them to the websites to apply for services. And got a little bit more granular to take a little bit of pressure off of the shared infrastructure. But the end result was there were not enough bodies in the seat to take the influx of the calls that were coming in. So one thing is for sure, I became really aware of, I just became a future former state employee very quickly if we did provide a positive outcome for the citizens of the state of Arizona. We saw other impacts. We had to be able to pivot, and people had to work from home. And that was a challenge for us as well. And the biggest challenge there, some of the agencies were not ready. We had a cloud first policy that I implemented back in 2018 that required a cloud first strategy and implementation for state agencies, boards, and commissions. We were able to vacate the primary data center that was well over 40 years old. And that saved us quite a bit. For my agency, we were pretty mobile. We no longer were purchasing desktops. We were purely laptops. Supply chain choked off very early on. They got inundated with rashes of orders for laptop, VPN tokens, and routers. We were a little bit better prepared, but some of our agencies were still landlocked with, all their equipment internally to themselves. So we had to, see what we could do, but the supply chain went from ordinarily delivering in weeks to delivering in months.
Wow.
We had to look at other sources, maybe third-party off-contract sources to try to, handle that. But my cloud operations team, I put them to work to look at standing up VDI solutions. We were up AWS, Citrix, and Azure VDI solutions within a few days for those agencies that did not have the laptops to be able to, provision for their people to work from home.
Gary, those sounds like, in covering some of the federal response, VA, for example, had huge delays in getting hardware, especially laptops and headsets to employees as well. So these, even at the state level, it sounds like the same challenges applied, although I'm not sure how many had to deal with a 40-year-old data center and all that extra stuff on top. Plus the call volume, good Lord. 800 calls a second. I'm just curious, so we'll move on in a second and we'll come back to some specifics, but at that level, can you even respond to that many people? What happens to most of those calls? That's an insane amount.
Well, early, we found early on within the first week and a half that we were peaked out for the day within the first 15 minutes. At 8:15 in the morning, we had more in the queues and, in the hopper that we wouldn't even be able to get to. So, we had to work with these specific agencies. We had, vendors that were on contract that provided the support. We got them rolled in at about the third week to provide additional bodies. But it was just insurmountable. It was long hours, a lot of frustrations. But the quick response to be able to filter the call volumes coming in to relieve some of the pressures, we saw that in that cloud solution that we stood up, that there were a lot being facilitated in the front end and not getting to the queue. So it was a slow release of those calls that were in that cloud queue, and we would filter it to make sure that we did not go above an 80% peak.
Gotcha. Thanks, Gary. Michael, let's go to your perspective from Maryland. Was it similar to what Gary experienced?
Yes and no, Frank. Thanks. We have approximately 50,000 employees, 11,000 of which my agency is responsible for providing their IT needs. Prior to the pandemic, everyone went to an office every day. And although the state has a telework program, the intricacies of it are such that doing the 2 hours of paperwork every day to work remotely just really wasn't worth it to most people. So we had approximately 1,000 people in the state that had the capacity to telework, but very few of them did. We moved very quickly in mid-March from everyone being in the office to no one being in the office. Literally, the decision was made on a Thursday evening. Friday, everyone came in and we told them to take laptops home and go home. And similar advice to other agencies. Maryland, I don't know quite what they did in Arizona, but we have a significant number of state employees that are on administrative leave. And we have folks that are doing essential jobs, specifically working their regular schedules. And to Gary's point, when we had a significant increase in the volume of call centers, we added VoIP and ACD licenses and got folks from other agencies trained up very quickly to answer calls. So with regard to unemployment insurance, a number of our programs with regard to how to apply for small business aid, things of that sort, we have people from many agencies taking those calls and then having roundups at the end of each session each day to find out what we had missed in the training and make sure it was digestible and sent out to everyone. We didn't have the problems that you mentioned about getting laptops. It took longer than any of us would have liked, but we had to purchase about 4,000 laptops over the space of a month. And our primary vendors were able to handle about 75% of that. And there were secondary vendors we already had relationships with that we were able to add to that. The other thing that I think may be a little different is I've been in this position about 3 years, and it became very obvious to me that with my prop, everyone under the age of 70 uses one of these to do everything except deal with government. And I've had the interesting career that I'm an attorney by trade and banking executive, but every decade I would take 2 years out to go do government service. So I was the land use officer in the county where I live. I was the first director of the University of Maryland Medical Biotech Institute. And when I took this on, it was very important to me and to our senior team that we look for ways to modernize so that we could build an enterprise without people knowing they were actually joining it. And so what we've come up with are two significant programs. One, which some of you may have heard of, is MD Think, that we are moving all of our health and welfare applications to the cloud with our federal partners. That is moving along smartly. And the other that has worked so well that we're not getting any press, bad or good, is we started a program we called the One Stop Platform. And initially, we took every permit, license, document, and interaction citizens or residents of the state might have with the state and put them in an elastic search engine that also had a particular look and feel so that the user interface would be the same for all agencies. And then started inviting the local governments, the counties and municipalities into this system. So we have a number of counties that have put their land use and development regulations in the system. The second piece of this, what we're working on now, is actually digitizing and modularly approaching each of the applications. So for example, when I first started, we had 8 agencies that came to us and said they wanted to modernize their 30-year-old mainframe licensing systems. And they all brought similar proposals that would take 2 to 3 years to implement and cost $4 to $5 million. Well, we created one methodology and we're implementing each of them for low 6 figures and in 3 months instead of 4 years. And if you think about it, there are a number of aspects of that by creating modules, they are applicable to any number of other applications. So for example, when we had issues about how do we process all the applications for unemployment insurance or for our grants programs when the underlying mainframe structures didn't work, we were able to use the one-stop technology to speed up a number of those processes. In fact, we went from our Department of Commerce processing about 100 grant applications a day to small business. They came to us with a proposal from a vendor that would have taken 90 days and $4 million to implement. And we had a system up and running 8 hours later that the next day cleared the entire backlog of 17,000 applications. So it's working amazingly well. And the biggest challenges at this point are making sure we don't get ahead of ourselves, because we're all moving so quickly that we want to make sure, because of the lack of personal contact and because of the lack of those day-to-day conversations that people talk about issues, that we're not missing something that's going to broadside us in the future.
Gotcha. That's a really good deep dive. And I think you mentioned the one-stop platform hasn't gotten a lot of press, but there are a few reporters on this live stream. So hopefully you'll get some press, and hopefully it'll be semi-positive. Lauren, so tell me about the first day that you guys started to go to remote work. I imagine we're talking about the Air Force. This is one of the agencies that you can't just cease operations, right? With the U.S. military, it doesn't happen. So what did you do?
So first, a lot of people couldn't immediately go to remote work because, you do have to keep up with the classified systems, all of that. So we definitely had some folks that were considered essential that did continue to report to work as safely as possible. And of course, anyone with a family situation, people were very, very flexible. But if I look at pre-COVID and post-COVID, just a lot of really interesting things there. So pre-COVID, you had a lot of the innovative teams kind of off using their own systems and not 100% reliant on the network itself, which, it's funny to hear everyone talk about their federations. We are federated across the DoD, but I think all of the services would say that they're even federated from within. So that's kind of an added challenge. But most of our generals and our SESs do have offices at a military facility, did have access very consistently before COVID to all of their systems. And so you'd hear the innovation community saying, hey, it's so hard to telework, why don't we fix this? But until everyone in the organization feels the pain, in limited budget environments, it is hard to get after it. And so COVID was that crisis that forced everyone to see in an equal way that we were not at the point that we wanted to be with telework. And the Air Force had done a lot of work to move to the cloud, to get on Office 365. We hadn't completely finished our migration, though, at the time that COVID hit. And so we had all of the Air Force except the Pentagon on Office 365, but the Pentagon was still on a separate exchange. And so we had to do, a lot of acrobatics to kind of get things moving. But I'll tell you, the very first thing, that we tried to do as leaders was just set the tempo, tell everyone, look, your safety is the first thing that counts here. We're going to do everything we can to get everyone working effectively from home. We rolled out a new Microsoft solution that we could get to everyone, including the Pentagon and to our folks that didn't have laptops or phones to work from at home, so that they could access most of their business needs from their own personal laptops and phones, which is just really wild for the Department of Defense. But it's something that has gone incredibly well. And I am actually excited to hear the 4-star generals saying, look, this is here to stay. I'm not going back. This is a capability that I need. And so I see BYOAD. We say bring your own approved device instead of just bring your own device within the Air Force. That is something that the commercial world has had for a while, but COVID is going to force the envelope. We were already working on it, but I think that COVID definitely helped speed up a lot of the legal approvals and getting people through to accept it. beyond the, the innovators who have said for years, hey, we need this.
Metrics wise, I believe we're hearing from Gary and Michael, we're talking tens of thousands of employees. You guys are at a spot where you have, 750,000 people, right, under the Air Force. And I believe at a event recently hosted by Defense One, one of our sister publications, that right early on, you guys had about 10,000 VPN connections for that large of a workforce. So I imagine the first couple of days were pretty stressful in trying to figure out how the heck do we get everyone working from home, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So, it's funny that could be one of those, audience tricks, like, hey, think of a number between 0 and 750,000, and who actually picks 10,000 as the number of VPN connections we had on day one. But that just goes to show that, we were a very in-person, high personnel touch business. And, if you weren't in the room, you weren't really relevant. Maybe people didn't even think you were working, if you weren't physically there. So yeah, that's changed. We have ramped up to about 300,000 VPN connections, and our IT ninjas did that within a course of just a couple of weeks. They were pretty much working around the clock. We were talking every morning and every evening across the entire IT organization, which we all established is a bit federated. So you need to get about 5 or 6 generals on the phone to hit different parts of the IT organization and really just drive through all of the roadblocks very quickly. But it was a really exciting opportunity for our IT people to show exactly what they could do. In a lot of ways for the IT organizations, and I'm sure the other guys can echo this too, it was kind of the IT 9/11, where they could earn their capes and show what superheroes they were to move things forward quickly.
Yeah, we'll come back to that as well. And also, I think the interesting spot from you and Steve is that we're dealing with a lot of classified information, right? A lot of people that work in the military have to deal with sensitive, unclassed, or classified secret, and there's going to be some sort of forced innovation, I think, from this catastrophe that may play forward. Steve, give us the outline of how those first few days were for you from DISA's perspective as sort of the IT arm for all the Defense Department.
Sure. So they were, even the first few weeks were very interesting. Very high paced. We watched. It was really encouraging. Well, one, to back up Lauren's point, across the department, it was safety first. We went into this telework posture and with a group that we weren't traditionally very telework. I don't want to say telework savvy, but we weren't a heavy telework organization across the entire department. And we went and flipped the script nearly immediately. The way that I always thought about it is, and sort of to back up and describe it for a lot of the folks on the phone, we have what we call the NIPRNet, which is our unclassified network that is broad across the entire department. And really, it was probably 95% of people on that network, 5% off, remoting and doing whatever. And, the data was typically contained there, although we are starting to branch out and leverage more cloud and SaaS and IaaS services. But, it was traditionally this bubble. And last fall, we started to reconsider, okay, it's not going to look like this bubble for much longer. How do we start to look at this problem differently and leverage services outside? And really COVID accelerated the heck out of that, right? We went from, I wouldn't say admiring, but starting to get our hands around the problem to suddenly thrust into a world where, holy cow, we just flipped and we moved 95% of the population off of the network with only 5 remaining on. And so, we saw overnight this occur. We watched organizations, struggle with the VPN kind of problem. DISA, we were actually pretty well positioned. Our culture shifted when we moved from Virginia to Maryland back in like 2011. We went to a little bit more telework, not nearly what we are at this moment, but we went through telework drills every year just to make sure that, if the entire population was pushed out, we were ready, the systems were exercised, that kind of thing. So within DISA, as an organization, we adapted pretty quickly. The department, there was some work to be done there, and there still is. But yeah, that dramatic shift created a lot of strain on the IT systems. I mean, to give some examples and kind of shows the way that people are working differently now. I know everybody loves email. We've seen in our enterprise email system, we've seen email grow by about 30%. So about 30% more messages. And initially I was, just seeing way more mail flow come into my mailbox. And then I talked to our email guys, and across the board, we were seeing 30%. So that was pretty interesting. Our remote access VPN capability that we provide for a number of groups around the department, not just DISA, but for a number of customers, we watched that grow tenfold. So nearly overnight, the graphs were just really impressive to watch. The logarithmic kind of graph as things went through the roof. Watched all of these systems build and adapt, and there were some struggles. There were definitely some challenges that came with it, and I couldn't have been more proud of kind of like what Lauren said, where we just watched folks jump in and really get involved. And there wasn't nobody was worried about an 8-hour workday or anything. We were all in. It was around the clock, and we were really busting our humps to try to get and provide the best possible services. So it's really interesting how things have changed. I think we've kind of settled in now. There's still some work to be done. I think people are mentally adapting to this way of doing things, where you're doing a lot more video teleconferencing. I, for one, was very much a just in time kind of person. I do personally miss a lot of the hallway interactions, but we just have to approach it differently and be more out there and make the effort to engage with folks just in a different way.
I'm sure Michael likes to hear that the move to Maryland, everything was good after that, from Virginia, but didn't even think about that. Let's transition to a little bit. So we outlined sort of some of the challenges. Let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that you guys are using to meet the mission in the way it is now. We can go across the board on this. Feel free to, I guess we can start with Gary, but feel free to talk about some of the tools that you guys are using in abundance more. I know we talked about Teams a bit at the Defense Department, right? There's been an expanded use of that suite of tools. But what are you guys seeing use more? What are the challenges there? Gary, we'll start with you.
Probably the single most is a lot more teleconferencing. We're on Google platform, so we have Google Meets. We have more team meetings, daily touch points. We review our projects and just keep a finger on the pulse of things that are going. So we've seen an extension of the office and more in the virtual world. I think some of the challenges, there is, some people get into the work from home. We have found that some miss the office environment, and they want to go into the office a couple of days a week just to feel normalized again. So we've been very flexible in that manner. But I think that like the other panelists, we have a lot of good people doing great things, and at the time that we needed them most, they stood up and delivered. We're collaborating a lot more with the agencies. We're meeting twice a week, just to go over. We get updates from the governor's office. But what solutions are going on? We're collaborating on where can we enterprise the most? Because I think the most critical thing post-pandemic will be, what about our budgets? 2 or 3 fiscal years down the road, are we going to pay the price for what we've had to expend to normalize a work from home environment? So looking at, also, the existing that are there, we're looking at, can we renegotiate them for more favorable terms in the event that we need to sustain business operations and mission critical services that we may not be able to provide if the financial or the economic impacts are not there. So we're leveraging a lot more cloud tools. We've moved a lot of instances to the cloud. We've shut down 75 data centers or IT closets or IT spaces and moved into a shared hosted data center. that now we have a smaller one roof plan. So the cost savings and cost avoidance can be spread across, making sure that we don't find ourselves in a stranded investment environment or having to do deferred maintenance on contracts or equipment. Let it be somebody else's problem in the cloud. We're paying for a service now than being labored with, how are we going to cover the cost of our maintenance across our server farm? How are we going to keep pace with technology and innovation? We had to do a lot of quick training, turning server administrators into cloud administrators nearly overnight. They've responded very, very well. So we're leveraging as many cloud tools, SaaS solutions, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, where it's appropriate, where we can find a strategic advantage. But we have to do the partnership internally with the other agencies and commissions in order to be successul. And that is what we're focusing on now.
And Gary, the states have so many different missions you have to fulfill, right? Do you find a few months in now that you're able to meet mission demand across the board adequately compared to what you think you do?
Yeah, I think early on it was the lessons learned, but
okay, good. Well,
I took an approach of, let's prioritize based upon health, life, and safety first. We needed to identify and uncover which agencies fell into, that mix. And I was quite surprised that there was a half dozen agencies that were health reliant that we needed to make sure that we could support. So we've stuck to that mission or that mantra, if you will, because everybody wanted it and they wanted it now. And everybody's mission was more important than the last. But we were facing a medical pandemic, so that's why we went with health first. We early on, within the first week and a half, 2 weeks, I got pulled into, and my team got pulled into setting up, overflow locations for the Department of Health Services. We had to stand up 3 locations around the state. Doing the site surveys and getting things ready to go. So that was out of our really unique skill sets, but we had to expand our horizons and, answer the bell. So to support, our Department of Health Services, as well as a Department of Emergency Management, in concert, we collaborated and we stood up 3 overflow locations that actually came in very handy. Early on, we were not getting hard with, the volume of patients as what maybe other states were, but we've been increasing, over, and we're in that upper percentile of, how many cases we do have.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you guys have been a hotspot in the news for, that's never the reason you want to be in the news, but sort of a fact of the situation that we're in. Michael, over to you. What are the most important tools that you guys have either used more or brought into the enterprise to respond? And then have you been able to deliver on all the various missions the state of Maryland has to deliver on? And do you think you'll get there?
So let's start with a funny story, because it's one I'm sure you'll all relate to. Everyone grew up and has worked with Microsoft Office products forever. Maryland is a Google Apps state, but everyone still uses Office. So the great thing about the pandemic is everyone had to learn how to use the Google tools, because to work remotely, as you said, without incorporating other devices that didn't meet our standards, the easiest way to get their emails and their documents in our cloud was through the Google applications and Exchange. And that has led to a number of folks who in the past have said, I've always done it this way, suddenly saying, wow, there might be other ways to do things. So our biggest challenge has not necessarily been meeting the mission, because I think we've been extraordinarily lucky that Governor Hogan thought about how to address COVID very early on. Our statistics are very good compared to a lot of places, and our use of the data that we acquire, and I have to put a plug in for my deputy, Lance Shine. He was the principal IT architect of our contact tracing application, which was self-built. And the reason we did it ourselves was because most of the vendors said they couldn't deliver what the epidemiologists wanted in the time frame that we've set. So the biggest change has been that everyone thinking about our continuity of operations plan always thought about how do we support the building in the past. Now they're actually thinking about, okay, what things do we need to do if we're remote? And to Gary's point, it's not just the budgets, it's the fact that I think all states are going to see a substantial reduction in revenue. And for the FY21 budget, all of our agencies have taken cuts, but luckily for us, the governor, as Lauren said, has given us our capes. And so our budget was cut far less than others. But we've still had to make some difficult choices about, do we look to spend money today to modernize so that we will have savings across the board and better scalability going forward? Or do we, do more with less and keep what we have running for another 2 or 3 years while we sort out what technology that's going to come along then will work better? The other piece of it that I'll just add, because it's more about mindset than the technology. Historically, typically, each agency has its own CIO and CISO, and I've worked with them rather than most of the other cabinet secretaries. I mean, I had a relationship with them, but they weren't interested in how you plug the particular device into the wall to make things happen. We've implemented a policy over this last year, creating what we call portfolio officers that are basically business relationship managers. And we have created the language that we don't want to talk to anybody who is not in our agency in IT speak. Everything has to be in plain English. So they have to define a problem to us in plain English. And then they have to define their workflows in plain English. And by doing that, suddenly people are far more willing to talk to us because they're not as concerned about a vendor coming into them and saying, my black box will solve your problem. The other aspect of that is, of course, that something as serious as a pandemic, folks in bureaucracies are cautious by nature anyway. But the potential fear of failing or doing something wrong that impacts the public in a significant negative way, is always a gigantic concern, and people take it very seriously. But I think because of our ability to start talking to folks in English and talking about how they're defining failure, we've moved beyond failure is something didn't work. And now failure is it didn't work and I didn't learn anything from it and I made the same mistake again. Right. And you don't think about that as having a huge impact on organizations, but just that small change in their mindset makes them more willing to take the risk of talking about things that they used to worry about, looking uninformed or silly. What if it doesn't work? At this point, if it doesn't work, we are finding out early, it's iterative, and we fix the problem before we spent millions of dollars and impacted people's lives. It's something that if we had learned earlier, we wouldn't have implemented. So our biggest shift has been in mindset rather than the technologies themselves. And to what Gary said, we're doing the same thing there. But I'm most excited about the fact that we are actually getting people to talk to each other.
That's good. To Lauren and Steve. So let's hit the same topic on what you're I guess if, how you're meeting the mission, what tools have been most important, and then I want to touch on that bit about sensitive information. You guys work in a little bit different space than most do. So what are the ramifications there? And let's start with Steve. Just we'll try to keep this a bit short because we're starting to get low on time. But we have an audience question about whether or not DoD will ever be less federated, and perhaps COVID will be the disruptor that sort of makes this change possible. Questioner is saying that each of the service has their own SAP IT infrastructure that makes collaboration on certain classified topics almost impossible. Steve, maybe you can address that question and then also talk a little bit about what the future holds for DISA, where we're at.
Sure. So I don't have well, I do have a magic 8-ball, but it's broken at the moment. But if I think the answer is yes. However, it's going to probably happen differently than most people think. So as we start to move to a lot more of these software as a service platforms and even cloud in general, I think it will start to happen naturally. Just as we've seen internally 10 years ago-ish, DISA stood up our enterprise email platform. It was originally for the Army, and then we started bringing other components from the department on. And so as we centralized that function, we gained a lot from that. And I think the same is going to happen here as we start to centralize and move towards these common commodity platforms. I think it will happen naturally. It's just sort of the natural progression of IT. So, there's a lot of ways it can be going about, but that's kind of what I'm seeing on the wall right at this moment. In terms of tools that we've employed since then, we've already hit on some of the O365 work, or M365, I guess now as they call it. One of the interesting things early in the crisis, we were actually working on a classified remote Windows capability that my team had been prototyping, and we were in the process of rethinking it when I got the tap on the shoulder and told, "No, you're gone. It's going out now." And so we turned and we took what was a prototype and quickly, figured out how we were going to productize it and rapidly deploy it and stamp them out. And so we spent, about a month getting to that point, and then we were rolling them out. So we are, since then, we've put a tremendous more amount of capability out there with respect to how to deal with the classified mission, both on-prem as well as off. So pretty excited about where that's gone. And Lauren, I know Air Force is doing a lot in that area too. You guys, there's AFRL's got some projects in that area, but you guys are doing a lot in that space too.
Yeah, I can definitely share there are some exciting projects underway to get after some of the SAP IT issue. I mean, I think a lot of it is federated on purpose, which the asker may realize that. So that's probably one of the most complicated parts of IT. Other parts in the secret and top secret realm, we have kind of cracked how to do telework in that way. It's just that doing that at scale, we're not sure yet, like, do we want to do it at what scale? What does that scale mean? And so it's not really a technical problem as much as it is, let's make decisions and provision. But we have expanded our classified remote work capabilities quite a bit. And just back to the original tools question, I'll rattle off a couple for you, but Office 365, we've gotten pretty strong use of Mattermost as well. As a collaboration tool. We're trying to definitely maximize use of collaboration tools in general. And I know Steve earlier was talking about the inbox amounts going up. We had that in the beginning as well. But as we started to teach people to use Teams more and to use their chat rooms and to use the real-time collaboration features that are inherent in Office 365 and G Suite, people stopped sending quite as many emails. And so that was actually, we saw that as a good thing. And then, of course, Zoom and WebEx are huge right now. Google Hangouts as well. I've seen more people start to use Trello a bit just to manage tasks within a team and to kind of remember different pieces. And then also one thing I'm pretty excited about is we're using more user experience monitoring tools. And so with everyone teleworking, I mean, it's horrible if it takes you 5 minutes to connect, or if every transaction is 40 hops. So people have been looking at that data much more seriously and taking much more urgent action because everyone is on it, including our senior leaders. And, we don't want to be wasting everyone's time times 750,000 people. So that's been pretty exciting too.
And if I can just add one last thing on to the question about the SAP IT thing, and one thing I meant to touch on there was also that there's generally more acceptance, not so much with COVID, but it was already happening with rather than physical hardware separation that we've traditionally, not just in that realm, but across the board, we've pushed for physical separation on things. There's more acceptance of software-oriented separation, and so those kinds of things may drive some commoditization in that space where we're using attributes about data or people or those kinds of things to help to create that separation versus physically having different stacks of equipment.
Gotcha. It'd be fascinating to watch this sort of develop over the next few months and see how many of the changes you guys have had to make stick around and perhaps become, we hear this term all the time, the new normal, and what the ramifications might be. Everything from, maybe even becoming a more attractive workforce, especially on the technical side, where you have these cloud native environments that people prefer anyway, but government sometimes will shoehorn you into the old way of doing things. I'd love to see those changes stick around. With that, we've sort of reached the end of our time this afternoon. I want to thank you guys again, Gary, Lauren, Michael, Stephen. I'm grateful for your time and the insights you helped us out with. Next up, I want to welcome my colleague, Sam Jackson, who's going to continue the conversation. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Frank. And my name is Sam Jackson. I'm Senior Producer of Events at Government Executive Media Group. And at this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Devarius Peoples, the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in conversation with Steve Lefrancois, Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Verizon, for a session presented from our underwriter, Verizon. So Steve, Devarius, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate you having us on and hosting, and great panel discussion. And what it really highlights to me is that the need to have consistent communication and collaboration has not diminished whatsoever. If anything, has increased due to COVID. And Devarius, I'd like to ask you, questions related to some of the panel discussion. And really it's around how has your organization, USACE, really been able to embrace either managed or as a service offerings during COVID, and did it provide you, and what really were the benefits that you saw from that?
Yeah, so one of the things, especially as COVID-19 happened, just from a core standpoint, we started off rocky. The very first day of remote work, we started off with a fire at one of our primary data centers down in Vicksburg. So that was about a 12-hour outage. So just imagine what the landscape looks like when everybody's working remote and nobody can connect to the network. So one of the things we've been working with some of our mission partners is how do we modernize our concepts of, quote, data centers. So looking at more of an Equinix type of concept, that's what we're moving more towards through our digital transformation efforts in the Corps. Being that that's the case, it has forced us to look at how we leverage more so of a managed services concept from the deployment as well as through the operationalization of technical capabilities. We've been able to see a lot of success in that type of approach. There are inherently government functions that we can't get rid of. However, it has allowed us from a government standpoint to put more emphasis on the oversight aspects of things, the oversight, the governance and due diligence, while we work in conjunction with those mission partners that are moving the ball forward. The approaches really yield a lot of meaningful work to our team members because it has allowed them to grow. Granted, this as a service, this managed service concept is something that is continuing to evolve inside of the federal space. So it provides an even more direct relationship with industry. It brings more opportunities as well, and allows us to be more innovative because now we get out of the day-to-day wrench turning from a technical perspective, but it allows us to be able to look at a higher level and be able to guide the mission forward from that aspect. So those are some of the benefits of the Corps have seen, especially as we work remote, as we support, as you all know, the alternate care facilities and so many other things inside of the technical space that supports our districts and divisions as they fight in the COVID-19 spaces.
Excellent. On top of that, Devarius, have you seen any acceleration of moving away from legacy technologies to free up the workforce, as not just as a result of COVID, but has that really started to accelerate some of that activity within USACE as well?
It has, and we've seen that in some of the capabilities that we've deployed, the leveraging of O365. For email and some other capabilities teams. I know the department, especially from the Army, the Department of Army has leveraged the DoD capability, CVR, which is a managed service type of capability that the DoD CIO has allowed us to be able to use to talk across the aisles and collaborate effectively within the department. So we've seen a lot of benefits from that, and those in the fields really appreciate a capability like that, because it reduces the burden of having VPNs and those type of things for connectivity, which allows you to connect over your Wi-Fi and be able to move forward from that aspect. So there has been a keen interest in as-a-service capabilities or managed service capabilities, and we are looking to explore that even more, especially as we work remote, because this is now becoming more so of the new now. Won't say the new norm, but the new now, and every day there's a new challenge. So how we adapt managed services has allowed us to really be able to provide services to that endpoint or to that end user and be successful.
And you mentioned moving to capabilities such as Equinix and outsourcing. Has that also driven some of your technology innovation as you start to make some of those migrations to centralized IT as well, or cloud services?
It has, because one of the things it's done internally is forced us to look at our app rationalization processes. It has also forced us to look at how do we converge and what aspects of convergence. Working with Big Army, Corps is rather unique. We're not on camp posts and stations, but we're in districts and divisions. So we have what I call nice views when you look out of the water and those type of things. So we support more of the local districts and divisions, and the mission is slightly different because disaster relief is one of the key areas that we focus on. And with that being said, how our users connect to the network is critical and key, and that's slightly different than the conventional DoD network. So within CoreNet, how do we scale, how flexible we are, and how we meet the mission? Those Equinix concepts, which is just one concept, that really allowed us to be able to think outside the box, but also meet our need, because now we have direct connections to those things from a CAP connection for cloud access points and those other type of concepts. We're looking at a lot of things across the board to try to evolve how we do business, and these are some of the things that has really helped us out.
Outstanding. Now, Lauren had mentioned that this was the 9/11 for every agency, IT organization, and who would be your big superhero, your superhero activity for USACE during COVID?
Our superhero activity. We've had a lot. I would definitely say we've had several, but I think the VPN, our VPN capability, getting that aggressively stood up was our superhero capability. Reason being, we started building alternate care facilities the week after everyone went remote. So fiber cut day one, in less than 72 hours, we were able to get VPN stood up, expanded for 80,000 users. When you look at the average day for capabilities, we only had about 800 users connected to the VPN every day. When COVID-19 remote work issuance came down, we had to scale that up to about 36,000 users connected now every day. So just imagine how aggressively we had to, I'm going to say, scramble, work with our mission partners to be able to allow for connectivity, also be able to get hardware in, because from a government standpoint, we're not the most, we don't turn things around as quick as we should at times. So there is a slight delay, but to be able to get this turned around pretty aggressively in record time, especially from a government perspective, was really our superhero capability. And then I also say one more thing is the leverage of being able to leverage the Flow 3 Microsoft capability for OWA, allowing our users inside of an O365 cloud environment to be able to access email without having to go through VPN. That really saves us a lot of time, because it allowed us to reduce the burden on our network, and also allowed our users to be able to access a lot of their mission critical applications and capabilities. So those were our two, I'm going to say, hero-like capabilities.
That's outstanding. And I know you were unprepared for that question because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that earlier, but we're hearing a lot of continuing to drive that kind of innovation within the Army Corps. So thank you very much for everything you're doing there. And Sam, I think we're wrapping up.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Steve and Devarius. And with that, we've reached the end of our program. So once again, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. And of course, thank you to Verizon for making today's event happen. This full webcast has been recorded and will be sent to you by the end of the week. So keep a watch for it in your email and be sure to share the conversation with your colleagues. Thanks again, and we hope you all stay safe and healthy. Have a great day.